Welcome back to the channel, folks. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Colonel William Tavington from the Patriot. A horrific embodiment of the atrocities of war, Tavington is the fearful result of unchecked power mixed with an inclination towards brutality. A callous soldier without mercy who was quick to draw the sword, seeking to establish his reputation by his heinous war crimes. While Tavington may be an inspired character in a fictional movie, it's a sobering fact that the barbarity displayed by him is but the tip of the iceberg faced by the unfortunate souls who lived through the terror of the American Revolutionary War. A war which ravaged the colonies of America in the endeavor for freedom and independence. On the topic of his inspired origin, Tavington was based off the real-life Bannister Tarleton, who was likely just as, or if not more brutal than his film counterpart, given that he earned the same nickname of the Butcher as Tavington did, and became known as one of the cruelest men in the Revolutionary War. But in terms of their background, what little we know of Tavington's upbringing very much differs from that of Tarleton's, with Tavington having a pre-existing chip on his shoulder when he mentions a disdain for his father, saying that he squandered away his esteem along with his inheritance, leaving a void that he intends to fill with his efforts in the British Army. This disdain for his father has a lot to unpack, likely bringing with it other emotional wounds and insecurities which are at the heart of Tavington's brutality and his greed. Of course, that's not the only cause, but it's still a major component that cannot be discounted. On the outset, Tavington's appearance is rather standardized as per his status as a soldier, save for the green edges around his outfit, signifying his membership in the Dragoons, a faction which became infamous for their savagery under his command. One of Tavington's noticeable traits in the film is that of his role as a hunter, whether it's his constant pursuit of Benjamin Martin in his militia, or even something as simple as his catching of a firefly, a role which suits his aggressive and proactive nature while also scratching his itch for violence, to the point where Tavington earns his dreaded nickname of the Butcher, even amongst his peers. This reputation is seen in his debut appearance, when he arrives at the Martin residence and labels Gabriel as a spy. Tavington's quick resorting to bloodshed not only indicates his cruel nature, but also a prideful insolence seen in his disdain for formal guidelines and the rules of war. These rules, while restrictive, serve to protect whatever vestige of human decency that remains in such a turbulent time, restraining those in positions of power from degenerating into absolute barbarity. Tavington, however, is quick to cast off those rules, the likes of which is seen in his ignoring of due process when he hastily orders Gabriel's execution along with the other rebels. Beyond that, this insolence extends to a recurring insubordination towards his superiors as well, often acting beyond the scope of his orders despite incurring their disapproval. Perhaps in some sense, Tavington's inability to follow orders and directives represents an issue with authority, which we can imagine to have some root in his estranged relationship with his own father. As mentioned earlier, it's also a symptom of pride, in that he believes that he knows the best way to win the war. When Benjamin appeals to him on the basis of the rules of war, Tavington immediately draws his pistol on him, indicating his shoot first, ask questions later approach. Now, of course, in the dangerous setting of war, there are times when such measures need to be adopted, but Tavington is in no such situation here with Gabriel, with him posing no immediate threat and showing signs of conceding. The same would apply to the scores of colonial troops simply looking for respite in their injured state. This moment also serves to highlight another trait of Tavington's, namely that he relishes in the fear of his victims. After he points his weapon at Benjamin, it's as if he felt disappointed that he showed no sign of fear, hence his retargeting to his children, which then produced the response he desired. As with those who have become notorious in war, The pinnacle of Tavington's cruelty is highlighted in his choice to target innocent civilians, even women and children who have no direct part in the conflict. True, they might be guilty of aiding and abetting his enemies, but it's an offense that is hardly worthy of the death penalty. What makes it more egregious is that once again these vicious acts are deemed ungentlemanly and unbefitting of someone serving in His Majesty's army, with Lord Cornwallis mentioning that surrendering troops should be given mercy, and even asking for preferential treatment for his British officers in his negotiation with Benjamin. And if that's the case for officers directly in the war, how much more should Tavington have some leniency for civilians, as it would be hypocritical to expect a standard from others only for yourself to act contrary to them? By disregarding the social norms and being quick to shed innocent blood, Tavington is also putting the war into a more vicious cycle, escalating greater violence from the other side and making a peaceable solution all the more distant, as it'll only be a matter of time before they return an eye for an eye, abandoning the honorable standard since Tavington is free to indulge in his atrocities. And in witnessing these atrocities that Tavington commits, one can only gasp at how distorted his sense of morality has become. From the execution of Thomas, a mere child who could just as easily been restrained instead of killed, to the nonchalant killing of unarmed colonial slaves, down to the desecration of a church while the town residents were helplessly trapped inside. Tavington can easily be labeled as a mass murderer, one whose actions abhorrently stand out even in the savage conditions of war. But while there might be some devious sense of enjoyment in his acts, a notion which he suggests to Benjamin, it's unlikely that any pleasure that Tavington derives is significant, and this moment was more of his attempt to rile Benjamin up so as to remove the protective privileges he had under Parley. Rather, Tavington's cruelty likely stems from a compulsive need for advancement, an unhealthy fixation on victory, a notion which we can surmise when he prides himself to Cornwallis that he's never lost a battle. And judging by how visibly downcast Tavington appears upon hearing of Cornwallis's disapproval of him, it's plain to see just how much his advancement means to him. What makes the situation worse for Tavington is that beyond being seen as ungentlemanly, he is also deemed incompetent by Cornwallis, as he has a rather low opinion of the militia whom Tavington struggles to keep in check. A situation which undoubtedly doesn't bode well with Tavington and causes him undue pressure, which in turn results in more brutality in his attempt to control the situation. Apart from his motivation for advancement, Tavington does have some genuine contempt against the colonials, as seen by how he avoids eye contact with Gabriel after sentencing him, indicating an utter disregard for those he deems as traitors to the crown. Beyond damaging his own reputation, Tavington's ungentlemanly conduct is also recklessly short-sighted to say the least. As indicated to him, even if his side were to win the war, these colonials whom he is oppressing will still be regarded as his brethren, to whom the British will establish commercial relations with. But however degenerate his actions may be, it behoves us to not forget that Tavington is but a tool in the hands of his superiors. He may have been ruthless in his way, but it was a ruthlessness that was still within the limits of their restraint. Like a dog being loosened from its leash, Tavington was enabled to embrace the full extent of his brutality only by the approval of Lord Cornwallis and the promise of aristocracy. And from there, Tavington's morality dips sharply further into degeneracy. The promise of the state of Ohio is an enticing reward, but one which would come at a high cost. The fact that Tavington would be willing to be disavowed by his home country for the sake of a foreign title testifies to the extent of his ambition. At the end, he was wrong about at least one thing, in his notion that honor is found in the end, and not the means. If Tarleton's real-life reputation is of any indicator, history is not as forgiving as he thought, with his legacy forever stained by the blood of the victims he was so quick to put an end to. Should Tavington be a non-fictional character, his reputation would be just as nefarious. A brutal man who embraced the fullness of his degenerate nature in the horrors of war, a coward who preyed on the helpless and the innocent, one who showed no mercy and in return was shown none in the event of his premature demise.